really sensitive, clear discussions of these ideas. And moreover, they were like listening to the commentary from the team opposite them and taking it on board and really thinking about it and being empathetic about it. And I thought, whatever this is, whatever is prompting these students to engage this way with one another, that's important. And so that is what I decided to bring with me to Minnesota when I came back as a postdoc at first, and now as an assistant professor in our philosophy department. So to say a little bit more about like the kind of civic virtue that I think is a big part of what Ethics Bowl has to offer. I grew up in the Midwest, and one of the things that is so characteristic of us is that we are taught to be very polite, deeply polite. Even though I was educated by Jesuits and by nuns, still what I learned was that we must always take great care in public to avoid conversations about religion, politics, and anything too blue. But I think that ethos has kind of run us aground today. These kinds of conversations touch on the central ethical questions of our lives. What are our principles? How do we know what's right and wrong? How do we divide and share power? How do we interact with one another at kind of our most vulnerable moments? I think especially over the last couple of years, especially over the last couple of presidential elections in particular, we've seen it become practically a mark of pride to avoid having these conversations, especially with people who disagree with us, and especially the political ones. But I think that we are called to a higher responsibility as citizens and as co-creators of our communities. And I think that learning to live together in that way requires that we learn to understand how one another sees the world and how we value the world, what things we value and what we hold dear. But those conversations require skill, and they require empathy, and they require intellectual engagement with things that you disagree with. And all of those things are learned. They require role models. They require people to watch, to see how they do it, to see how they hold themselves when they hear other people like explaining ideas that they disagree with, how they take those ideas on board and respond to them. Learning those things requires discipline, requires being willing to listen actively and not be forming an objection as you're hearing what somebody else is saying. And it requires practice. It requires being in the presence of people who are actively disagreeing with your position or actively criticizing it, and doing the work of integrating those criticisms. And those skills, all of them, are the bedrock of the Ethics Bowl. Our Minnesota High School Ethics Bowl is one of the newest participants in the National High School Ethics Bowl. And one of the things I think is really cool about the National High School Ethics Bowl, which was founded back in 2012, is that in those years, since that National Bowl got started, they've been collecting data. And that data has shown that the event teaches students and promotes ethical awareness, critical thinking, civil discourse, civic engagement, and an appreciation for multiple points of view. So, of course, you might at this point be asking, that all sounds great, but what exactly are we talking about? What is the Ethics Bowl? So, Ethics Bowls are competitive yet collaborative events in which students discuss real-life ethical issues. In each round of the competition, teams take turns analyzing cases about complex ethical dilemmas and responding to questions and comments from the other team and from a panel of judges. This might sound a little bit like debate to you, but what's different about it, and what I think is unique and really wonderful about this, is that students aren't assigned opposing views. Rather, they defend whatever position they think is right, is correct, They provide each other with constructive criticism, and they win by demonstrating that they have thought rigorously and systematically about the cases and engaged respectively and supportively with everyone else who's participating. So every year, teams like ours, teams and regional bowls like ours, compete for spots in the National Bowl, which is held at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Our bowl takes place in late January or early February every year, and the National Bowl takes place about a month later. All of that is the culmination of a whole season of preparation that begins in September. The season officially begins with the release of the core of the ethics bowl experience, which is the case set. These cases, usually about 15 in total, are the main focus of students' activity over the course of the semester. When they're in the actual competition, the dilemmas that the students discuss during the competition come from these cases. And the topics are always current events, things like that. And they run the gamut from small interpersonal dilemmas to society-wide choices that impact all of us. For example, the cases for the 2020 to 2021 season, last season, covered ethical issues from internet censorship to factory farming to Tiger King to defending the police to social distancing in the classroom. And to give you a sense of what those cases are like, I thought that I would bring a few with to show you. So here's a particularly timely one, I think one that is on all of our minds, especially those of us who teach or have students in the classroom today. Let me pull that up. So this was the fourth case for this season. No more teachers, no more books. And that case goes like this. As the summer of 2020 drew to a close, parents, teachers, and students across the nation wondered what schooling would look like in the fall, given the continued impacts of COVID-19. A primary question was if and when schools would open for face-to-face instruction. It was clear that no matter what decision was made, some individuals and groups would experience significant hardship. While many schools opted for a virtual start to the semester, many also decided to begin their school year in person. Many parents were and continue to be concerned about the health and safety of their children. In response to these concerns, people often claim that spread of the virus to and from children is rare. They point to studies that seem to support the conclusion that children are at low risk. The sample size in such studies are often small, and evidence running counter to this conclusion abounds in the United States. In multiple states, for example, summer camps had to shut down because an overwhelming number of campers tested positive for the coronavirus. While many international reports suggest that coronavirus has not, and this was at the time that this question was set up, obviously that's changed a little bit in the interim. Most students. This is unfortunately not the case in the United States. Even if deaths are rare among children, we do not know what is possible. We do know that it is possible for them to suffer severe organ damage, including brain damage. Moreover, some viruses have symptoms that only show themselves much later in life. For example, childhood chickenpox producing shingles. Coronavirus cases might appear mild in children, but we don't yet know enough about this virus to know what might happen down the road. Furthermore, even if parents grant that their children are at low risk, the fact remains that COVID-19 can clearly be spread between adults who can suffer and die from it. Bringing children back to school in the fall doesn't just involve packing children into small buildings together, it involves packing adults together in close quarters too. In many cases, teachers and staff have been given no choice regarding their educational delivery method in the fall. This includes teachers who are immunocompromised or those who have immunocompromised loved ones for whom they care. Continued employment, especially during a recession, is a compelling force. Many people cannot quit their jobs. On the other hand, There's a recognized need for children to have formal education. Some argue that students have already experienced a developmental setback when classes transitioned online this past March. This burden has fallen especially on the shoulders of already vulnerable populations, such as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and students with special needs. Additionally, in many cases, parents cannot continuously be full-time caregivers of their children when they're, some jobs can't be done from home, and parents who work those jobs need a place for their children to go where they'll be safe and fed. Many of these people are already suffering financial hardship, and they pay taxes to fund schools. So as you can see, this case, which is, I think, a really wonderful example of not only the timeliness of the kinds of cases that are core to the ethics bowl, but also the complexity of those cases, does a very good job of drawing out the considerations that weigh sincerely on both sides of this dilemma. With this particular case, students were given this series of questions to consider. Was it morally permissible to open up schools for face-to-face instruction under the circumstances? Who should be or who should have been involved in discussions about reopening schools? What principles should be used to make these decisions? Is there a meaningful difference between the way the decision to reopen is made by public schools as opposed to private or independent schools? So as participants in the ethics bowl, as teams from our high schools participating in the ethics bowl got started in September, this was one of the cases that they considered. And I think at this point, I want to give one of our star coaches, Mo Jansen, and her kids, who are both team members over at Roosevelt, an opportunity to talk a little bit about kind of what it's like, Mo, for you to prepare these cases with your team. And Mo's kids, if you would like to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about what it's like to kind of study these cases and think about them.
Thanks, Kat. We're happy to talk. So, Will, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I'm Will.
And I'm Ivy. So we got involved with Ethics Bowl because I'm an alum of the PhD program at the University of Minnesota, and I was aware that Kat was organizing folks and reaching out. And I, of course, had a connection to Roosevelt High School, which is a high school that's part of Minneapolis Public Schools. So I contacted the school, and with Will is older. He's a junior this year, and we got a team organized. So we have done it for 2 years now. And Will, do you want to say a little bit about your experience with Ethics Bowl?
Sure. So I competed last year with our team, and then this year was a little bit smaller. Not quite as many people wanted to join, but this year it was really nice to get together and talk to people during COVID when we could safely distance outside. It was really valuable to spend that time with talking to other people.
What do you think, Ivy? This was your first year, a COVID year. Ivy's a 9th grader at Roosevelt.
Well, it was a little weird to do the competition over Zoom, but I really enjoyed just talking about the cases with my team and hearing everyone's different perspectives. And yeah, I was just really happy that the meetings allowed us to meet and see people, especially since we were doing distance learning, and we really didn't see that many people during that time.
Yeah, so thank you both. What did you do, Will and Ivy, in preparing your cases? How did you get yourselves sort of thinking about the ethical issues? What were you doing?
So we spent probably the majority of our time reading through all of the cases, and case by case, we would kind of have a long discussion about the prompt questions and the issues in each case to decide what our stances on that could be and what reasoning we would use. And that wasn't always the best strategy because in ethics bowl, you need to like come up with a position in like 3 minutes, and we would have these like long discussions about it. And so then we were a little bit less prepared for the competition.
So it sounds like you're learning how to do it as we go along.
Especially our first year, I'm new to ethics bowl as well, so I was new to the competition style. So we really enjoyed these like long, deep conversations, and then we were like, "Whoops, we've got to learn how to get to the point rather quickly." So we did better this year, and we would kind of practice like, "Well, what if someone else had this position? You know, how would you respond? What would you think about it?" So what did you find? Ivy, you were saying that you like to hear other people's point of views. So why did you think that was interesting?
Well, sometimes I would read a case and then I'd think about it like one way, and I'd be like, oh, like I feel like this position is kind of like what everyone's going to think. But it was really cool because everyone had a little bit different take on the cases. Everyone thought about them a little differently. So it was really cool to hear everyone's perspectives and the way they thought about it.
And we actually had the pandemic case that Kat shared with all of you. And I remember it was really interesting because we were competing against a school at the time that was a private school and was back in session. And at that time, the regional competition was in February, and Roosevelt had ended in person last March, and there was no plan even in February to go back to in person. And so it kind of felt like, oh, you know. Yeah. Although they're back in person now.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. So one of the other things that we have been able to do so far on the last couple of years with Ethics Bowl is have one of the University of Minnesota's philosophy graduate students come out to each of the teams and work with them and sort of thinking about philosophical frameworks that are useful or applicable in really drawing out the details of these cases. And I believe you all worked with Grace Sobrero, is that right?
Yes, we worked really closely with Grace our first year, and we had a lot of meetings in person. But this second year, we didn't really connect as much. And I think that was just kind of the overwhelming nature of the pandemic. But Grace was a big help our first year, especially kind of getting us to think. Actually, it was fascinating for me because it's always fun to get together with another philosopher, and I could kind of direct like, well, this is what I think, but then having another person who's a trained philosopher say, well, have you thought about this? And I was like, no, you know, tell me more. So getting some more perspective was really a wonderful help.
That's awesome. And I wanted to ask you, Mo, in particular, you had been telling me a little bit the other day about what the experience of being a parent of an Ethics Bowl team member is like. And I thought that was really cool if you wanted to share kind of what that experience has been for you.
So one of the cases was about, from a parent's perspective, it was about parents who had gone to a PTO or PTA meeting and talked about their school-based clinic and what a school-based clinic should or should not do. And so we got to have that discussion as, with the team, like, what do we think about that? And then we were talking about, well, there's the school-based clinic at Roosevelt, and so how does that, like, and I, as a parent, then I was like, well, hold on a minute. If you were going to go on certain medications that were prescribed to you through your school-based clinic, I would want to know as your parent, so then the kids and I had these different discussions about it. So it kind of opened up a chance or an opportunity for us to talk about something that we may not have kind of come to our attention. You want to say anything about that? Okay.
Well, it was
awesome.
It was just interesting to hear what our mom thought about it versus what we thought about it. We wouldn't have had that discussion unless that was one of the cases. So it just brought up these different questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love that story. And I think that's part of what is just really wonderful about ethics bowl, is that these things that we normally, out of like politeness or just sort of the ease of not having a particular kind of conversation, ethics bowl really puts it in this framework that makes it safe and useful to talk about, and makes it easy to have these conversations in a way that is really grounded in thoughtful engagement, as opposed to sort of like, this is my view.
And a lot of the kids that we have a small team for Roosevelt, so that when you go to competition, you I think it's between 5 and 7 can be on a team and be involved in the competition. So we had I think we had 5 this year, so
Yeah.
3 other kids besides my own kids. And last year we were maybe a little bit bigger at times as people were coming in and out. But it's the other kids that are involved are kids that I've kind of known through my kids growing up in the neighborhood throughout the years. And it's really great to have these discussions with them too. So I feel like, we can talk about, they kind of know me as someone who's open and willing to talk about these things and kind of engage in these hard questions. So it like what Kat said, it presents an opportunity to have really interesting, deep questions or deep conversations that you wouldn't normally have, in passing with teenagers. So I love it, and it really connects to my beliefs about teaching to, to open up these spaces where we can explore, as Kat was saying before, the intersection of our lives with our philosophical beliefs. And so it's really fun to do that with my own kids and their friends, and hopefully spur a love for philosophy. You feel the love for philosophy? Yeah.
All right. So I want to, at this stage, get a little bit more in depth about like what the actual competition kind of is like. So basically, once we get to the day, the bowl, the competition itself consists of a series of matches. During each match, 2 teams meet to discuss the cases that they've been preparing all semester long. There are 2 halves to each match, and during each half, one team is presenting and the other team is commenting. Then they switch roles for the second half of the match. For each half, the presenting team is given a random case from the set of about 15 that they've been prepping over the semester, along with a new question other than the discussion questions to think about and answer in the course of their presentation period. So they're given a few minutes to confer about this new question, and then they present. After their presentation, the commenting team has a few minutes to confer and sort of coordinate, and then they get to respond to the view that the presenting team has offered in the few minutes that they had a chance to present. Then the presenting team has a moment to talk about what the comments given by the other team mean for their position, and to kind of think about either integrating those comments or responding to them. And finally, after all of that, the judges, the panel of judges, who are usually either members of the community or graduate students from the philosophy department, or faculty, like myself, from the philosophy department, they ask questions of the presenting team about the position that they have articulated. Then each team is scored on that part of the presentation, where that score is a matter of the quality of the arguments, the extent to which the team engages with the questions offered by the judges and the comments offered by the other team, and the extent to which they engage in respectful dialogue. Like, this is actually like part of doing well at the bowl, is being kind, respectful, and receptive to the views that the other team puts forward. And then, of course, they switch roles for the second half. So with that all kind of in mind, Will and Ivy, do you want to speak a little bit to sort of what it's like being in that moment?
For me, it was a little stressful, like just the fast pace, just how fast paced it was. How quickly we had to come up with an argument when we had these long discussions about the cases is a little hard. But it was kind of comfortable after a while, like that you knew your argument wasn't going to be torn down. Like just that ethics bowl is so about this respectful dialogue. It was really nice. Like we could say something and then the other team would add on to it instead of like breaking it down. It was good.
Yeah, and I felt like over Zoom, it was probably a little bit less stressful than in person, even though it was a little bit hard to confer with our teammates in the breakout rooms, trying to converse online.
All right, thank you. Well, I will let the two of you get on with your day. I know you have places to be in the world, but thank you so much for sharing your experience with the bowl. This was wonderfully helpful and enlightening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Mo, is there anything else that you wanted to kind of add to this discussion? Bye.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, I mean, what drew me to the bowl, and again, I was new to it and was kind of persuaded to join by Kat's enthusiasm and her commitment to it. But it was the civic and values that she talks about and the virtues that it promotes, and this feeling of civility and kind of connecting and modeling civil dialogue and these hard conversations. So, Kat, I'm noticing we have a couple questions in the Q&A. I didn't know if you.
Yeah, we'll come to those
Sure. Okay.
in like 4 minutes, actually probably less. Before we get to Q&A, I want to put up a little message for how to get involved if you are interested, and I'll just leave this up as we go into Q&A. Or I'll give you a black screen that says nothing. Here we go. Okay. So if you are interested in getting involved, either as a parent or a student or just a community volunteer who's excited about this idea, you can do that. There are a couple of ways to get involved. Parents and students, you can go to ethicsbowl.umn.edu/join. And there you will find a forum and some more information about how to participate in the bowl. Seasons get started in the fall, so you have plenty of time to sort of get in gear and get a team ready and everything. And if you would like to volunteer, there are tons of things you can do to help out with the bowl on the day of the competition. We need judges and moderators. Judges are the people who listen to both teams and ask questions, ask sort of probing questions about the views that the students have presented over the course of the competition. And moderators do the work of keeping everything flowing. It is an incredibly important job, and it is absolutely wonderful to have people from the community participating in that. I think it really makes it meaningful in a way that the students appreciate, and of course, I and the rest of the Ethics Bowl team very much appreciates. So if you would like to volunteer, you can do that at ethicsbowl.umn.edu/volunteer. And if you have any questions about Ethics Bowl, you can either email ethicsbowl@umn.edu or me at csaintx@umn.edu. So that, I think, will close out my formal presentation of stuff, but let's go to Q&A as Mo aptly suggested.
So Tom Anderson has a couple of questions. He said, wonderful presentation. I have many questions. How is the divide between thinking and feeling about an issue dealt with? Does having it being a competition influence that balance?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really great question. So I think there are a few different ways to go with that. But one of the things that I think is really important is the idea that the feelings that we have, these sorts of moral emotions, are really often a guide for thinking about the actual sort of principles and ethical frameworks that we're drawing on. And so I think one of the things that Ethics Bowl is really wonderful for doing is drawing out what those feelings are picking up on, is giving the students, as they're prepping over the course of the semester, time to really think about why and how those emotions are coming up, and to sort of systematize them and relate them to the beliefs that they actually hold, the like ethical commitments that they think are true and good, and formulate them into something that they can express fluently and share in the course of the like 5 minutes that they have to make a presentation in the competition. So I think that it gives them a chance to do this sort of alchemy of moving from, I feel this way about an ethical issue, and I'm pretty sure those feelings are important and they're picking up on something real, to here is what I thoughtfully and systematically believe about this question. Mo, do you have anything you want to add to that part of this question?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question, and I totally agree. I love the way you structured that, Kat. And I think, I mean, that's what we try to do as teachers when we teach ethics to our college students, right? So you have this intuition or this feeling, and so then why is that? You know, like, let's go back and get the ethical language so that we understand. And Ethics Bowl isn't necessarily about teaching, you know, like an ethics class where you learn Kantian ethics and utilitarianism and virtue ethics. But as we discussed these things, I would kind of say, well, why do you think that? And the students might say, because we should be free, or because it feels like we should respect somebody, or because that's just not good for everyone, right? And those all connect with those ethical theories. So giving them a language to use when they you know, that they have this intuition, and that it's a good one, and then connecting that to what we know in ethics.
Thank you. So Tom's other question is, are there structures in place to ensure that teams, either individually or as a whole, reflect a cross-section of the society, racially, economically, sexual orientation or presentation, etc.?
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I should also answer the other part of Tom's earlier question with respect to the role of the competition in kind of shaping how students respond to these questions and how they shift from kind of emotion to argumentation. And I think that one of the things I think is really brilliant about the way the Ethics Bowl is set up is that the scoring, the incentives that are set up, really ask students to really push them to be articulate and to be thoughtful and to be respectful, but not to lose the because there's this sort of back and forth, this dialectic, this dialogue going on, not to lose touch with the sort of moral emotions that fuel their engagement with the issues. So I think this, like, the structure is sort of unique in really fostering that balance in a helpful way. But I want to give Mo a chance to come in on that too. And then I'll come back to this question. Sorry, Rebecca.
Sorry.
Yeah, I agree. I think the competition is, well, now I'm going back to the competition. I've lost track of the questions.
Oh, no worries. If you go to the answered tab in the Q&A tab,
Yeah.
You can
okay, there
see
we go.
actually Tom's original
Oh,
question.
how does it have a competition influence the balance? I mean, I think
Yeah.
when we had the competition, so I think my students in particular, and our team in particular, we weren't so interested in winning it all. And I think that kind of reflected in how well we did. So I think, this is a competition, and there are students and if teams that really prepare a lot for it. And if you win the regional competition, you go on and you compete in a larger regional, and then you compete at the nationals. And those teams really prepare heavily for this and really practice. And for our team ethos was more like, hey, we want to get together and talk about these cool cases. And so we didn't have an expectation on our team that, the students would prepare and read the cases and, read up on other related things that they could bring in. We just took it that it was, a good chance to have these conversations. So, I think having a competition definitely hones people's thinking and sharpens their arguments and really creates the people who really take it seriously and the teams that really take it seriously. I think that they're incredibly impressive, as Kat mentioned, because they've really thought through these arguments in a really detailed way. But that wasn't necessarily my team's goal, and so we were more casual about it.
Thank you. So going on to Tom's kind of second question about structures in place to sort of manage concerns about different kind of axes of social oppression or orientation. Right now, the bowl is a little bit small. And so part of what I'm hoping to do with this kind of outreach is to bring in more schools, more economically diverse schools, and to bring in schools that are not as well served by our community as they could be. Because I think that one of the best things that Ethics School does is really shore up, is really provide a love of learning that motivates well beyond what I think regular schooling often has an opportunity to do, because these are issues that are part of their real lives that they are thinking about day in and day out. So this program is part of that structure. And then I think that the questions, there's actually a board at the National High School Ethics Bowl that works to construct questions that touch on many different domains of our lives, and in particular that touch on economic inequality and issues relating to gender and sexuality, that talk about racial inequality. One of the cases that in particular was, I think, really interesting and well put together last season was the case study on defunding the police, that talked a lot about the motivations from both sides of that issue, from the side of communities that feel victimized by policing in a way that we're all very familiar with here in Minneapolis, and from the side of people who feel like the police serve an important function, and tried to draw those ideas together in the course of the question, and in the course of thinking about the question, in a way that made both sides of that discussion vivid and serious, rather than sort of rhetorical ping pong balls.
And can I jump into, I'd say that,
Please do.
That in the competition, the more nuanced and aware of the way that these issues affect a wide swath of society, that's really encouraged. And one of the things that the teams can kind of call each other to is like, well, you're not thinking about it from this perspective. And so that might be, a minority perspective or a different perspective, or the perspective of the oppressed. But I would say, just from my experience these past 2 years, is that the students are amazing, and they really, the ones who are drawn to this kind of thing are pretty socially aware, and those are issues that kind of weigh on their hearts. And so they speak really respectfully about, the diversity of perspectives that might be related to an issue.
I think, oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, go.
I think the other thing I would add to that is that as the main organizer of the competition, I do make an effort where possible to have panels of judges be diverse in every way available to me. That pool of judges is fairly small. So if you would like to help diversify that pool of judges, I very much invite you to do so. But that is something that I do think about, especially in terms of gender diversity, which is something that we do have at least modicum of control over in setting up those panels.
So
I can tackle that second question about how students are chosen to participate, just from my perspective at Roosevelt. I should say that Roosevelt is, again, a Minneapolis public school, and it has over 70% free and reduced lunch. So, we're definitely, a school of a lot of diversity and, different experiences. So when I decided to coach the team, I contacted the high school and just said, hey, I'd love to be a coach for your team. And they have like a club time that meets on campus. But a lot of my students who are interested, and my own kids too, were like, oh, but club time is when I go to green team. And they really wanted to keep those commitments. So we decided to kind of meet outside of the frame of club, but we opened widely and advertised widely across the school. Now that's the place where we can continue to work, because like I said, most of the kids that I was involved with, I had 2 of my own, and then a few others that I have known. So it was harder for me to draw kids that I haven't known. So that's something that I need to work on. And a team, like I could be the coach for a large group of kids at Roosevelt, but during the competition, I would need to break the kids up if we had too many. So for instance, the number that can participate as a team during the competition are 5 to 7. So I could have a team of 14 students, and then I can have 2 Roosevelt teams, and they could even compete against each other. So there's a lot of ways to do it. Did you want to add, Kat?
Yeah, I think that's all correct. I think the only thing I'd ask, like the very minimum to form a team is 3. So you can have a team of 3, that's totally legitimate. It's a little bit hard to do the competition with 3 because it's a lot to put on 3 students, but it is possible. Yeah, I think you handled that question well.
Yeah, and I think the last questions, I think they do have to be from the same high school, because we had some interest in kids from another high school. Not all my kids' friends go to the same high school, or we have a cousin who's from a different high school, but it's based through the high school, I believe. Is that right?
So that is correct. So teams have to be, each team has to represent some accredited and certified school, though there is a homeschooling exception. So students who are homeschooled, given some verification of homeschooling, which is like just me chatting with you and making sure it's true that you homeschool. If you homeschool, you can form a team with other homeschool students in the region. So if that is your situation, just shoot me an email and I will do everything in my power to make a homeschool team happen for you. I think that would be amazing.
Is Minnesota considered the region, or is it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we are the Minnesota Regional High School Ethics School, though even though that is the region, we could have high schools from like South Dakota, for example, participate in our bowl because we would be the nearest regional ethics bowl to them. So if you have connections with folks in the Dakotas or any other neighboring state, and you want to drag them in, we will take them.
Great.
And Kat's really easy and fun to work with, so enthusiastic. So you should get involved.
Yes, please do. Really, like, the community is the lifeblood of the Ethics Bowl, and it is an absolute delight to be here, to be chatting with all of you. And I really hope that you will consider bringing Ethics Bowl to your student schools.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us, and thank you for the work that you're doing. It sounds wonderful. And we need to end next week. I'm blanking out on, and I apologize, I'm missing what our session next week, but please join us. It's on our website. We've got a great Sunday Forum page on our website, where you can find our upcoming presentations and archived recordings of our whole season. So have a great day. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you.